Our contestant is a pirate. He's also a villain. Let's welcome him, please. Captain Hook. Hi, nice to have you on the show.
Alright, welcome back to the Disney Villains Retrospective, everyone. I appreciate your patience with me as I've been putting this relatively lengthy video together. Before we really dive into things, I just want to let you know that I've started a Patreon. There's a link in the description, and I'd definitely appreciate if you gave it a look. I'll try not to verbally plug this at the beginning and ending of every video. I'm only mentioning it here and now because it's just gone up. Anyway, on to Captain Hook. As you can see by this video's length, there's a lot to say about the villains in Disney's Peter Pan franchise. Some of this is because the source material is incredibly interesting, with its mix of childhood fantasies and not too subtle Freudian subtext. But a big reason is because Captain Hook is probably one of the most frequently used villains who originated during Walt Disney's lifetime. As we track the evolution of his character, from his dark origins in the books to his increasingly amusing and clownish appearances in cartoons today, it will be pretty easy to see why. The history of Peter Pan is a rather long and complicated one, so for the sake of this video, I'll be brief and start with the stage play. In December 1904, Peter Pan, or The Boy Who Wouldn't Grow Up by James Barrie premiered, captivating audiences. The show would go through multiple revisions and would be adapted by Barrie into a novel in 1911. Peter Pan, who had previously appeared in Barrie's novel The Little White Bird, is an eternally youthful boy who lives in the magical realm of Neverland. It's the world's greatest playground for an adventurous kid, full of mermaids, fairies, natives, pirates, and wild beasts. An adventure is guaranteed daily, and the bulk of them involve Peter's arch-nemesis, Captain James Hook. At some point prior to the story during a sword fight, Peter cut off Hook's hand. Although he has come to enjoy and even prefer having a hook than a hand, the reason the captain truly has it out for Peter is because the boy threw his hand to a passing crocodile. The croc decided then and there that Hook's hand was so tasty that he just had to have the rest of the pirate, and has been stalking him ever since. Luckily for Hook, the croc also swallowed a clock at some point, and the eternal ticking gives its presence away. But if the clock ever winds down, Hook knows he's a goner. It's the constant paranoia that the croc has brought him that seems to really fuel Hook's thirst for revenge the most, but he has other reasons to hate Peter. For one thing, Peter Pan is kind of a jerk. It's evident in the Disney movie, but the original play doesn't hold back on how cocky and conceited Peter is. Hook fears the inevitable death that will come from when the clock literally runs out, but if Peter plays his cards right, he can live forever. It's possible to kill him, as Hook almost does twice in the story, once injuring him on Marooner's Rock and then almost poisoning him, but the fact that arrogant little Peter can potentially hold on to his youthful life forever definitely strikes a nerve with the pirate. The way Barrie describes Hook is quite interesting, and it seems that the author became somewhat infatuated with his own character. He wrote of how Hook studied at Eton College as a youth, a British prep school, and has one person in the fictional account describe Hook as the handsomest man I have ever seen, though at the same time, perhaps slightly disgusting. Barrie also notes that Hook is, of course, not the captain's real name, and he sailed with Long John Silver at one point in his past as the pirate's bosun. According to legend, Hook was the only person Long John feared. Of course, Hook's own bosun, Smee, later on brags that he was the only person Captain Hook feared, so take that as you will. Hook has a dual nature about him, trying to appear as a civil and proper gentleman, while also being a bloodthirsty pirate. We see his ego ebb and flow throughout the story, having to maintain his status as the tough-as-nails captain to his increasingly impatient crew, while also going to pieces every time he hears the ticking clock. His need to be a gentleman is linked to his obsession with good form. He's a monster, and he knows it, so attaining this proper behavior is impossible. His dim-witted bosun Smee, however, is so innocent and ignorant that in his humility, Hook believes that he has attained good form. It's enough to make the captain want to kill Smee, but killing a man for having good form would be bad form. That's another reason Hook hates Peter Pan, since he has also obliviously achieved good form. Peter is noble despite his many flaws. During one battle, Peter stops to help Hook regain his footing because it's the right thing to do. Hook does not respond in kind and bites Peter, allowing him to get the upper hand. Or upper hook. I'm sorry, I need to get one of those jokes in early. The point is, Hook has no honor. Not among thieves, not among pirates, not among anyone. In the end, Hook goads Peter into knocking him off the ship into the crocodile's jaws. The pirate's death was inevitable at that point, and Hook dies in happy spite, knowing he got Peter to demonstrate bad form. And then, of course, there's Hook's black-hearted crew. I already mentioned Smee, who definitely is the most notable member. He is described as an oddly genial man with several quirks. For one thing, he nicknames his sword Johnny Corkscrew, because of how he wiggles it in a victim's wound, an act that he calls tickling. It's a little unnerving to think of Smee as having a body count, but he is still a pirate, even if he's a lovable one. Yes, in spite of his murderous ways, Smee is a lovable coot, especially in the eyes of the kids. Wendy, upon hearing that Smee doesn't know what a mother is, decides that if she could have a pet pirate, it would be Smee. Oblivious as ever, Smee assumes that all the kids fear him, and no one has the heart to tell him otherwise. Many other pirates make up Hook's crew, of course, and although we are given some brief names and descriptions of them, none are as fleshed out as Smee. Walt Disney had wanted to make a Peter Pan feature essentially since he began a career in animation, and the film was being planned as early as 1939. Due to numerous financial complications, it wouldn't be completed and released until 1953, so there was plenty of time to develop the tone of the adaptation. While there were some ideas for a dark take on the story, closer to Barrie's original version, it had become a light-hearted adventure by the time of its release. Captain Hook, conceived as being a brutal murderer like in the story, soon became a much more comedic character. While he was still as evil as ever, he tried harder to put on airs and really come off as a charmer. When manipulating Tinkerbell, for example, he puts on a special gold hook for the occasion. We still see him struggle to balance his false charm and his true pirate colors, of course, evident in his first scene, where he casually shoots a pirate singing loudly at the wrong moment. The original storyboards for this scene drove the point home even more, having Hook shoot the pirate in the middle of an etiquette lesson. He at least gives the pirate a brief moment of respect, complete with a funeral wreath, pulled from a chest of similar wreaths for the occasion. The best part of this cut version is Smee erasing the pirate's name from a chalkboard listing all the crew. Most, if not all, the crew members' names listed are actually Disney staff members. Walt Disney, realizing how likable they'd made Hook, suggested that Hook survive at the end and be chased off by the crocodile. This would be one villain audiences wouldn't want to see die. There were many ideas storyboarded and subsequently cut involving Hook. It seems that the animators were having a lot of fun coming up with ideas for the pirate. One sequence would have taken place at Skull Rock, where Peter and the children would have found the pirate's secret treasure stash. In a Goonies-esque scene, Michael would have set off many booby traps as they work their way through the skeleton-filled caverns. Although Hook has many henchmen at his disposal, at least 2 went unused. Some storyboards show a parrot, because they're cartoon pirates and a parrot is practically a prerequisite. Another character was an unflattering Chinese chef who would have provided some comic relief. Some of the storyboards with him show him scrambling around, getting in Hook's way, but Smee is present here as well. Even ignoring the racist qualities of the character, we already had Smee providing the same kind of gags, so the chef would have been redundant. Interestingly, one piece of concept art shows the chef holding a large cake. Presumably, this was going to be the poison cake that Hook leaves for the Lost Boys in the book and musical, which Wendy discards before the children can eat it. Speaking of poison, the scene where Hook tries to poison Peter was storyboarded. It was decided that a bomb would be more exciting, not to mention the animators wouldn't have to worry about adapting the famous clapping for Tinkerbell scene. In the final movie, Captain Hook is a far cry from his source material. No longer a pirate dealing with inner torment, he is now almost entirely played for laughs. There are maybe 1 or 2 brief moments in the movie where he looks threatening, and even then, they're not likely to stick with anyone for very long, even the youngest of viewers. Hook is a clown and a codfish. And I think that's okay, because the shtick with Hook, Smee, and the crocodile still holds up as being incredibly funny. As far as plot is concerned, Disney's Peter Pan tells a pretty straightforward version of Barrie's story, albeit shorter and simplified for screen. There's still some darker undertones from the original story that can be spotted, but it's easier to ignore them here and focus on the surface-level fun. Once again, Hook wants vengeance on Pan for the crocodile incident. After a few skirmishes, he manipulates a jealous Tinkerbell into revealing the location of Pan's underground hideout. He captures the children and leaves the aforementioned bomb for Peter, but of course his foe survives. A final showdown follows, leaving Hook swimming for his life, pursued, as always, by the croc. A small but notable difference, most likely to streamline the plot, is the reason Hook captures the native princess Tiger Lily. In the book, she is caught boarding the ship, intending to kill herself some pirates. In the movie, Hook is first shown obsessing over where Peter Pan's hideout is. He realizes that the natives know the island better than anyone, and kidnaps Tiger Lily to press her for information. The setting for that scene is different as well. In the book, Tiger Lily is left on Marooner's Rock, a large outdoor formation in the ocean. The movie expands it to be the cavernous Skull Rock, which proved to be such an iconic location that we will see it several times again in other media. Since Neverland represents the games played by children, it's natural that the kids will always win in the end. Hook represents the foe that puts up a challenging fight, but only enough to make the game interesting. His loss is an inevitability, and it's felt even more in the Disney movie than it is in the book. Captain Hook is hopelessly outmatched by Peter Pan, and it shows in every battle they have. Anytime Hook is up against Peter, he loses. And he doesn't just lose, he loses in the most humiliating way possible. His clothes are torn up, his hat is sliced to pieces, he is reduced to tears. It's a pitiful sight, and you can't help but feeling a little sorry for him by the end. Not that I'm actively rooting for Hook, of course, since he spends the entire movie trying to murder children, but Peter Pan himself is still rather unpleasant, and the way he effortlessly defeats Hook, even when he takes the pirate's challenge not to fly, leaves the stakes pretty low overall. As I said, a big part of Hook's appeal is that almost every scene he's in is hilarious. His dramatic animation, largely credited to Frank Thomas, is a marvel to behold. Another huge draw is his voice actor. Hans Conried absolutely steals the show, and I don't think this movie would be quite as enjoyable if he hadn't played Hook.
The way of a man with a maid, taking the best years of her life and then casting her aside like an old glove.
Conried also voices the children's father, George Darling, continuing the long stage tradition of having Hook and the father be played by the same actor. His voice can be heard in many other movies and shows throughout the 50s, 60s, and 70s, most notably as the villainous Snidely Whiplash. As in the book, Smee is the closest thing Hook has to an actual friend. At the very least, Smee is still alive, in spite of all the difficulties he inadvertently causes Hook. Smee, in fact, is probably the first truly incompetent Disney villain sidekick we've seen. Often the bad guys will have a henchman or two that bungle everything and lighten the mood. Smee is the first to properly fit that mold, and it leads to some wonderful bits of comedy. Clearly, Hook finds something endearing about Smee, or he would have been shot ages ago. None of the other pirates seem to like Smee all that much, and have even less patience for his antics. Only Smee's position as Captain Hook's main sidekick seems to be what's kept him alive for so long. And unlike future villains we'll see, like Creeper in the Black Cauldron, Smee doesn't seem to be brown-nosing Hook for any special privileges. He really seems to love and admire the captain. It's almost kind of touching. But there's a darker side to Smee as well. Although it's very hard to imagine this version of Smee killing anyone, he's still more than willing to do so. This quote from animation historian John Culhane sums it up very well. Smee is the perfect picture of the banality of evil. A short, fat, balding, blundering, nearsighted fool with the IQ of a turnip who is only following orders, and seems to have dehumanized the Indian child out of his lack of imagination so that he doesn't even realize that he may be helping to kill an innocent child. A deleted scene drives this point home even further. Hook and Smee think they found Peter, Wendy, and Michael hiding behind a large leaf. On Hook's orders, Smee shoots the children point blank. Of course, the kids weren't really there in the first place, and only after believing he's disintegrated the children does Smee ask if perhaps they've gone too far. Smee is voiced by Bill Thompson, known largely for his voice acting in radio roles. The pirate is incredibly similar in design to a role Thompson played in the previous Disney movie, The White Rabbit. The same roly-poly, bespectacled look would be used for future Thompson characters as well, like Professor Owl and Ranger Woodlore. The other pirates, again like in the book, are less defined. In fact, only one gets named on screen, Starkey, before he's thrown overboard. Model sheets and subsequent comics and games have revealed the names of some of the other crewmates. Some of them share the names of pirates from the book. Starkey, for example, along with Bill Jukes and Mullins. Wibbles shares the name with a pirate seen only in the stage version. Poor Skylights, the pirate who is shot by Hook for singing at an inopportune moment, is also in the book, and is also killed by Hook for inconveniencing him. In the book, Skylights is shot for accidentally ruffling Hook's lace collar. One recognizable pirate that did not originate from the books is this large fellow named Turk, because of his resemblance to a cartoonish Turkish stereotype. When he speaks, which isn't that often, it's with the general Eastern European accent. If you were to pause this video right now and do a Boris Badenov impression completely from memory, that's the general idea. It's unclear how many pirates are actually on Hook's ship. Sometimes it feels like the Jolly Roger is carrying 3 ships worth of pirates, while other times it looks more like a dozen or so. Certain pirates, like the named ones I mentioned, are distinct enough to recognize when they appear, but there are a handful of generic ones that pop up as well. Other times, probably to give the character designers a break, you'll see one of the named pirates in a different outfit or with an eye patch in various group scenes. Even Wibbles is essentially Starky with some sideburns. We're never sure how or when the pirates arrived in Neverland, but they've been here for a while, unable to leave until Hook finally gets his revenge on Peter. Hook's one-track mind with Peter Pan is perhaps highlighted in this movie more than it was in the book. In the book, Neverland seems to operate on the same sort of basic activities daily, with everyone hunting each other. Lost boys, natives, pirates, wild animals, etc. The Disney version simplifies this so that everyone is more or less friends, minus the pirates. The Lost Boys and natives hunt for each other, but mostly as a game of skill, presumably with no actual casualties. The pirates, in fact, are tired of Neverland, and desperately want to leave and do actual piracy on the open seas. Only Hook's obsession with avenging himself is holding them back. The first scene with the pirates establishes their frustration, and indicates that tensions are beginning to rise. This is supported later on as Smee continues to ramble to Hook about how they should really just leave Neverland once and for all. Hook mostly ignores all of this, and for all his comedic bluster, the captain is at least good at keeping his crew in line. They might not care about his vendetta, but I can't think of any moments in the franchise where a mutiny occurs. That brings us to the crocodile, lovingly known as Tic-Toc in many promotional materials and later appearances. He's a tricky one to define for the purposes of this video. I know I said there's a general predators are not necessarily villains mentality here, but the croc is hellbent on one particular prey to the point that it's gotten very personal. However, his prey is a villain himself. The croc is certainly no hero, though. He's not about to swoop in and save Peter and the kids out of the kindness of his heart. He hangs around for his own gluttonous desires. Villain or not, he's still a very important part of Hook's character, unfortunately for Hook. Although Captain Hook's dignity goes down the drain anytime Peter Pan appears, he loses it even faster if he even thinks the croc is around. At least Peter leaves after humiliating Hook, but Hook actively has to run away from the croc, who will never give up his pursuit. The two sequences where Hook is chased by the crocodile are some of the most enjoyable parts of the movie, supervised by animator Wolfgang Reitherman. Even reviews I've read that are generally more on the negative side can't fault these wonderfully choreographed moments. The crocodile never speaks, but his snapping noises are provided by sound effects wizard Jimmy McDonald. As we'll see in later appearances, like in comics and especially video games, the croc can sometimes turn his hungry attention toward the good guys, but most of the time, he devotes it all to eating the rest of Captain Hook. That should cover the first movie, but Captain Hook has made a huge amount of appearances since then. For the sake of this video, the very next entry we'll be looking at is the movie's direct sequel, 2002's Return to Neverland. Hook, having survived the Battle of Pan and ensuing crocodile chase, has not truly fled Neverland. The captain has his pride, for better or for worse. After who knows how many more attempts he's made on Peter Pan's life, Hook finally figures out a surefire scheme. Since Tinkerbell has enchanted the Jolly Roger with pixie dust at least twice, it can still fly. Thus, the pirates will fly to London, kidnap Wendy, and use her as bait to finally do Peter in. Time appears to pass differently in Neverland than it does in the real world, and the pirates end up kidnapping not Wendy, but her daughter, Jane. Hook is able to put on his charming act and fools Jane into helping him trap Peter, much like he did to Tink in the first movie. Of course, a little faith, trust, and pixie dust later, and Peter again triumphs over Hook. I like the rubbery animation on the pirates in this movie. The animation is kind of rubbery and overly expressive in general here, but I think it works best on characters like Hook and Smee. There are a few nice shots of Hook in the shadows as well, where he looks appropriately sinister. More sinister, in fact, than he did in a good deal of the original film. That's not to say that Hook is really all that more dignified here. Once again, he's outdone by a bunch of children at every turn, and to add insult to injury, his ship gets completely destroyed at the end by an octopus. Oh yes, the octopus. He proved to be somewhat controversial with fans. From what I've read, the animators felt that the first movie did all it could with the crocodile, so a new predator was introduced. Hook's evil plan at the beginning is to lure Peter into the ocean for the boy to be devoured by the octopus, but the creature ends up getting a taste of Hook and becoming obsessed with the pirate. Clearly, Captain Hook is absolutely delicious. The octopus struck many fans as a poor imitation of the croc, who is written out of the picture in a frustratingly vague way. The new predator even has the ticking clock motif matched. It rhythmically smacks its suction cups when following Hook, for no real reason other than to give the captain another telltale sound to fear. I suppose he's unconsciously doing it out of excitement, but that may be a stretch. Granted, I understand the reasons for a new monster to torment the captain. I don't know if anyone really could top those original crocodile chases, and the octopus is amusing and pleasant to watch in his own way. Still, I'm definitely on Team Crocodile myself. As we continue discussing Hook's filmography, it should be noted that in practically every credited speaking role he's had after the original movie, he's been voiced by Corey Burton. Burton does a remarkable impression of Hans Conried, and was also Smee's replacement voice actor until 2002, when Jeff Bennett took over the role. I can't find any direct confirmation on who voiced which pirate crew members. In certain video games made around this time, which we'll discuss later, the pirates are more talkative than they were in the movies, and I've seen people say that Rob Paulson voiced Bill Jukes, Jim Cummings voiced Turk, and Jeff Bennett voiced Starkey, but I can't find much in the way of confirmed sources. I did find a press release that at least confirmed Dan Castellaneta voiced Mullins, who barely speaks in any of his appearances. Go figure. Another big follow-up to Peter Pan that heavily featured Captain Hook was the Jake and the Neverland Pirates series. This one was squarely aimed at a preschool audience, so you'll forgive me if I didn't watch anything close to the entire series for this video. That being said, if this had aired when I was in the target audience, I probably would have enjoyed it quite a bit. The show follows a trio of kids, Jake, Izzy, and Cubby, who are pirates themselves. Rather than acting like traditional pirates akin to Hook, they focus more on hunting for treasure and helping others. In other words, they're pirates because they say they are. Captain Hook often acts as a rival treasure hunter who doesn't care about fair play or honesty. Since this is most definitely a kids' show, Captain Hook has become even more toned down than he had been in previous appearances. He's gone from the scourge of the sea to a cranky crook, and his never-ending defeats at the hands of children are even more evident at this point. The series features some very silly moments for the captain. If you've ever wanted to see Hook playing basketball or using a skateboard, this is apparently the series for you. The gag in the first movie, where Hook is shown to have alternate appendages for multiple uses, is heavily expanded on here, giving him an arsenal of hooks, like a propeller for flying or a suction cup for stealing. I'd say the only time in the series that Hook really seemed like his normal self was in the final episode, where he finds a magic rock that can turn anything to stone. His first move, of course, is to use it on Peter Pan. Unfortunately for Hook, every time he uses its magic, a little more of him turns to stone as well. For once in the show, we had the classic Captain Hook who wasn't above blatantly trying to kill a bunch of kids. Aside from the ever-present Smee, Hook's crew has dwindled considerably. His only other crew members are Sharky and Bones. Their speaking roles are done by Jeff Bennett, while their singing voices are provided by Lauren Hoskins and Kevin Hendrickson. The singers previously worked as the family-friendly pirate-themed band called Captain Bog and Salty. They provide and perform much of the TV show's music, and are usually seen dressed as their characters over the end credits, performing one of their songs. Sharky and Bones are even less evil than Smee, who can at least muster up some enthusiasm for piracy. The other two would rather have jam sessions than act like pirates, and are even shown to be on pretty good terms with Jake and his heroic crew. One starts to wonder why they're pirates in the first place. The TikTok Croc returns, of course, and seems a bit less eager to chomp on Hook. He seems more interested in scaring and chasing the captain, and treats it more as a game than a meal. Perhaps after all these years of pursuing Hook, he's realized that the hunt is what gives him the most pleasure. The octopus from Return to Neverland appears as well, although not quite as prominently. Like the Croc, he doesn't show much interest in eating Hook, and prefers to tease or steal from the captain. Either way, it's nice to see him again. Hook is given a love interest this time around in the form of Red Jessica, voiced by Jane Kasmerick. Jessica seems to operate under the same pirate code as Jake and friends, valuing adventure over theft. As far as I've seen, she either doesn't know about Hook's villainy, or just prefers to look the other way. Hook's mother, Mama Hook, makes an appearance, voiced by Sharon Osbourne. She's apparently raised her son to be the best pirate he could be, yet when she's informed that Hook's been stealing treasures from others, she's upset. I'm beginning to think that only Captain Hook actually understands what piracy is. Even by the show's logic, the treasure that the characters keep finding had to have belonged to someone at some point, yet Jake and his friends have no trouble taking it as long as the owner isn't around. If you think I'm giving too much thought to something clearly aimed at 4-year-olds, hi, welcome to my channel! The show amassed a pretty sizable rogues gallery as it went on. Let's quickly check out a couple villains introduced over its 4-season run. Beatrice LeBeak, voiced by Terry Hatcher, is a very sneaky, very crafty, very French pirate. She's an expert thief and manages to always escape with some treasure, even if she doesn't get exactly the loot she's been after. She's managed to outdo Captain Hook multiple times, often causing the captain to begrudgingly seek help from Jake. Dredd the Genie, voiced by David Tennant, isn't happy with his own magic and wants to become even more powerful by draining other genies of theirs. The Grim Buccaneer, voiced by Christian Slater, is a pirate obsessed with stealing the warship known as the Mighty Colossus. Lebeak, Dredd, and the Buccaneer are pretty content with just theft. Most of the other villains have world domination in mind, or at least Neverland domination. Shiverjack, voiced by Mark Hamill, looks like a cross between Jack Frost and the SpongeBob Flying Dutchman. He definitely leans into the Frost angle and chiefly wants to freeze Neverland. Dr. Undergear, voiced by Tony Hale, is a mad scientist that wants to conquer Neverland with his inventions. Lord Fathom, voiced by Malcolm McDowell, is a merman that wants to take over the oceans of Neverland, with assistance by his timid but ultimately loyal squid, Sinker, voiced by Jim Rash. An even bigger series inspired by Peter Pan was launched a few years prior to Jake, one revolving all around Tinkerbell. The Disney Fairies franchise began in 2005 with a series of books and comics. The first Tinkerbell movie wasn't released until 2008, and the script reportedly went through a number of revisions during production. Concept art shows that Captain Hook was intended to be in the first movie along with his pirate crew. Some art shows new pirates, while other art shows 3D renders of the crew seen in previous movies. Hook finally appeared in the fifth movie in the series, which takes place long before the events of Peter Pan. In Tinkerbell and the Pirate Fairy, a talented fairy named Zarina, voiced by Christina Hendricks, leaves Pixie Hollow after her talents as an alchemist are regarded as too dangerous. She falls in with a gang of pirates and manages to become their captain. The pirates are actually exploiting Zarina, using her to make pixie dust for them so their ship can fly around the world, stealing more treasure than anyone ever could. The real captain is young James, pre-Hook, who poses as the cabin boy to gain Zarina's trust. James, voiced by Tom Hiddleston here, is a real charmer. We've seen him manipulate both Tinkerbell and Jane in Peter Pan and its sequel, but he seems to be even more in control in this movie. Perhaps years of losing battles to children eventually takes a toll on his patience. He is at the top of his game here as he effortlessly gets Zarina to show him how to make an endless supply of pixie dust, and to teach him how to properly use it. Maybe I was reading into things too much, but there even seemed to be a few hints of romance or at least flirtation in their interactions, making his betrayal and attempted murder of her even more callous. As a nice nod to the backstory Barry provided for Hook, James mentions that he went to Eden at one point, and credits his education for being able to trick Zarina. James has an entirely different crew here than the ones we see in other media. There's Bonito, voiced by Carlos Ponce, Yang, voiced by Kevin Michael Richardson, Starboard, voiced by Mick Wingert, Port, voiced by Jim Cummings, and Oppenheimer, also voiced by Cummings. Oppenheimer is the ship's scatterbrain cook, and the one with the most screen time, most of it spent muttering to himself in the galley. He also has the distinction of owning an alarm clock that gets swallowed by a newly hatched Tick-Tock croc. Tick-Tock nips at James at the end of the movie, but presumably his pursuit didn't really start in earnest until he ate the captain's hand years later. I assume that after being defeated by a group of 6-inch-tall fairies, James's original crew abandoned him. A future crew member, Smee, makes a cameo at the end. Although James is clearly much younger than he is in Peter Pan, Smee, oddly enough, looks exactly the same as he does throughout the rest of the franchise. Notably, the pirates get a full-blown musical number in this movie, one of the only songs in the Fairies franchise to actually be sung by the characters on screen. In The Frigate That Flies, they anticipate all the wonders of the world they'll be able to steal with their flying vessel. Despite the ship being capable of flight in later movies, Captain Hook has become so caught up in his grudge against Peter Pan that he never actually uses it to steal any treasure. Zarina is as much a victim of Hook in this movie as anyone, but the original concept for the movie had her as the main villain and no Hook. Originally titled Quest for the Queen, Zarina was going to command an army of living orchids. She was going to injure Queen Clarion, and the plot would have been about Tink and her friends trying to find a cure while battling Zarina's forces. It appears that Zarina was going to try to command all of nature, or something along those lines, and would have been defeated in the end, rather than redeemed. Other than James, there weren't really any villains in the Tinkerbell movies. Vidya, the fast-flying fairy, voiced by Pamela Adlon, began as an unpleasant rival to Tink, and wasn't above playing some nasty tricks, but eventually became just as much a friend as the rest of the fairies, just one with a somewhat aloof side. There's also Martin Griffiths, voiced by Michael Sheen, who gives the fairies quite a bit of trouble in The Great Fairy Rescue when he tries to catch them and show them off at a science convention, but it was never done out of true malice, and he ends up befriending the fairies and growing closer to his daughter in the end. In addition to these major appearances, Captain Hook, of course, had some minor roles over the years. In the 50s, Peter Pan Peanut Butter naturally partnered with Disney and had the studio make some commercials. The characters were redesigned to look a bit more simple, but in a sleek way, similar to the cartoons put out by UPA Studios at the time. In a few of these ads, Hook tried to find Peter Pan's treasure stash of peanut butter, but was outwitted each time and found himself staring down the throat of a certain hungry crocodile. Like countless other Disney characters, Hook and his crew appeared here and there on the House of Mouse. Captain Hook also crossed swords with Tailspin's Don Carnage in an episode of the short-lived Raw Tunage. Carnage may be silly, but he's no slouch when it comes to battles, so it really says something that Hook is able to beat the pirate and escape with his treasure. Apparently, when he's not fighting kids in Neverland, he's a lot more effective. But speaking of kids in Neverland, Hook made a small but memorable appearance in the 1989 short Back to Neverland. This cartoon was animated for the Magic of Disney Animation Tour at MGM Studios and starred Robin Williams and Walter Cronkite. Cronkite explains the ins and outs of the animation process, and Williams helps to demonstrate by turning into a cartoon, namely one of Peter's lost boys. It's all fun games and manic improv until Williams finds himself face to face with Hook. As always, some pixie dust and an opportunistic crocodile guarantee a happy ending. Funny enough, Robin Williams would go against Captain Hook again only a year or two later in a non-Disney production. Meanwhile, the crocodile has made a surprising number of cameos over the years in other Disney cartoons, often acting as a predator. Like I've said in previous videos, I usually don't delve too deep into characters that act as carnivores, since most of the time they're just trying to survive like everyone else. The only appearance I've found where the croc actually acts as a villain is in a Tailspin episode, The Sound and the Furry. In this appearance, the croc is named Al and works as a henchman for a bird named Crazy Edie, voiced by Billy Hayes. Edie has a group of furry mogwai-looking creatures as her slaves, which she uses to sabotage airships, drumming up business for overpriced fix-it services. Al helps keep the critters in line, but he's not above trying to snack on them when Edie's back is turned. Over on the live-action end of things, the Once Upon a Time series reimagined Captain Hook as a dashing anti-hero, played by Colin O'Donoghue. Smee shows up in about a dozen episodes, played by Chris Gauthier. Peter Pan, played by Robbie Kay, became a flat-out villain and was the main antagonist of the show's third season. I apologize for not going deeper into Once Upon a Time's lore in these videos. It was easy to skim Jake and the Neverland Pirates for certain characters or moments, given it being a simple children's show. Once Upon a Time is very much a plot-heavy, lore-driven show, and would require even more of an investment for this video. I will restate what I said in the previous entries. I've been told that the first few seasons were especially good, with my sister assuring me that the Peter Pan material was some of the best the show had to offer. It sounds like they really took full advantage of Peter Pan being a really unpleasant child in the book and just ran with it. I'm all for that, and it's definitely something I need to look into some point in the future, just maybe not for these retrospectives. Moving away from the adult-oriented drama, we have something aimed at the middle school crowd, the Descendants franchise, focusing on the offsprings of Disney villains and heroes alike. Both Hook and Smee have different children depending on the installment. In the books, Hook has a daughter named Harriet, and Smee has a son named Sammy. In the Wicked World animated series, Hook has a daughter named CJ, voiced by Marina Valesco. In the movies, Hook has a son named Harry, played by Thomas Doherty, and Smee has twins, Squirmy and Squeaky, played by Luke Rossler and Christian Convery. Hook himself never appears, but Smee is played by Faustino de Bauda. An upcoming live-action film, Peter Pan and Wendy, will reportedly have Jude Law playing Captain Hook and Jim Gaffigan as Smee, although at the time of this video, there's not much other information out there. As a popular villain in movies and television, Hook of course appeared in a good deal of Disney comics as well. Several of Hook's appearances take place in Neverland, of course, where we see more of his encounters with Peter Pan and Tinkerbell. In these adventures, Hook has been on the wrong side of Tink's pixie dust at least twice. In one story, she uses the dust on the crocodile to send him flying after the pirate, much like in the later Robin Williams cartoon. In another comic, Hook has captured Tink and is so delighted that he begins thinking happy thoughts himself. Tinkerbell uses the dust on him this time, sending him unexpectedly flying into the air and back down onto who else but the crocodile. A series of one-page comics were printed in the UK called Peter Pan and Captain Hook the Crook. I've only been able to find 3 of these comics, but they really seem like quite a trip. In these comics, Hook and Smee come up with ingenious plans to capture Pan, only to result in humiliating failure. Granted, that's how most of Hook's appearances go, but these comics go into downright surreal territory. One, for example, has them being chased by an octopus, waving 8 clubs in its tentacles. One notable comic called Fed Up has Smee as the headliner. The pirate is tired of being mistreated and decides to sail off on his own. He quickly loses his glasses and goes through lots of Mr. Magoo-esque hijinks, including mistakenly taking a penguin as a crewman and believing a whale to be an enemy ship. Of course, Smee ends up back with Hook at the end, and the captain acts a little more appreciative of his loyal friend. For a few moments at least. The most interesting comic I found actually shows Hook's other archenemy. This one isn't a child, but a full-grown pirate. And, like half the characters in Neverland, he's an exaggerated ethnic stereotype. Captain Juan Emmanuel Rodriguez Gonzalez de la Pancho. His ship is called the Tortilla because, of course, it is. Pancho is in possession of a valuable treasure map, and the story begins with the pirates dueling over it. The map is lost and recovered by the Neverland mermaids. As it turns out, the treasure the map leads to belongs to the mermaids, and they ask Peter Pan to find it. The treasure is located in a secret cavern in Skull Rock, and is ultimately recovered for the mermaids after several battles with Hook and his crew. What I really love about this particular comic is that it makes use of several discarded ideas from the original movie. The imagery of the hidden treasure and the skeletons inside Skull Rock come from a deleted sequence I mentioned earlier, and even a gag where Smee messes around with the spyglass is reused from a scene with the deleted chef character. I love that Disney was able to recycle this material, and I wonder how many other Disney comics are actually based on deleted scenes that we're not aware of. Captain Hook also appeared in plenty of comics taking place outside of Neverland, sometimes with other villains like the Beagle Boys or Madam Mim. Mim, in fact, had a major crush on Hook, much to the captain's dismay. One character Hook began to repeatedly antagonize in the comics was a whaler by the name of Moby Duck. While he's essentially an obscure footnote to many today, Moby Duck was apparently popular enough in the 70s to have his own comic series that lasted 30 issues. Since most of his adventures took place on the open seas, it wasn't uncommon to see Hook appear to fight with Moby, Donald, Gyro, or whoever else was on board. Hook appeared a couple times in the Disney Fairies comics, where he was in his normal adult form, as opposed to his youthful self seen in the Pirate Fairies. There's also a dragon named Kaito who's imprisoned up on a mountain. Don't feel too bad for him, he's in prison for a reason, and the fairies generally try to avoid his territory. In 2009, a Muppet retelling of Peter Pan was printed after the characters had been bought by Disney. Gonzo plays Captain Hook, with Rizzo as Smee, Sweetums as Starkey, and a crew of other pirates played by Bunsen, Beaker, Statler, Waldorf, and New Zealand. In this version, Gonzo Hook isn't nearly as bad as Kermit Pan childishly believes, and their repeated battles are mostly out of a big misunderstanding that they stubbornly refuse to resolve. Rizzo Smee is desperate to leave Neverland, so he decides to take matters into his own little paws and end the fight by taking out Tinkerbell, played by Miss Piggy. Rather than using poison or a bomb, Rizzo attacks Piggy Belle on an emotional scale. A broken heart is fatal to fairies. This might be the most evil we've ever seen the hungry little rat. Needless to say, this one's a must-read for Muppet fans. Moving on to video games, Captain Hook is a natural pick for a boss fight. There have been several games focusing on the Peter Pan franchise that feature Hook as the main villain, and plenty more with the Captain as a supporting foe. I've talked at length about the Disney Villain's Revenge game in previous entries, and I believe this will be the last time it's going to come up. To recap, the game features the Disney villains altering the happy endings to their stories so the bad guys are victorious. In Hook's revised ending, Peter Pan has grown up, and is now a feeble old man, unable to hold his own in battle. The player must take Peter's sword and battle Hook instead, along with a few other pirates that drop in every now and then. In the 2002 game Adventures in Neverland, Peter hears about a treasure hidden on the island, and sets off to find it before Hook does. As you may have gathered at this point, Neverland seems to have an endless amount of treasure hidden on it, but I suppose it's the principle of the thing. Along with a slew of generic pirates that act as basic enemies, Peter fights a few notable bosses along the way. Starkey throws knives at Peter in Mermaid's Lagoon. Turk uses a stolen bag of pixie dust to levitate barrels of TNT at Hangman's Tree. A strange pirate ghost with a bomb chained to him tries to chase Peter, hoping to catch the boy in the explosion. The crocodile has swallowed Peter's panpipes, and needs to be battled in order to get them back. Of course, the final fight is against Hook. The captain, despite not being able to fly, is surprisingly agile. Smee tries to help by firing cannons at Peter, which end up being used against Hook. Another game came out a few years later that was somewhat similar in spirit. 2005's Legend of Neverland shows Hook once again trying to find some treasure before Peter does, and he's gone out of his way to steal Tink's pixie dust and kidnap Peter's friends to keep him busy. Once again, the bosses are mostly made up of pirates, including Bill Jukes, Starkey, Wibbles, Turk, and Black Murphy. Despite being the largest of the pirates, I was surprised to hear how high-pitched Murphy's voice was.
Well, if it isn't little Peter Pan. Come on, Pan. We'll have a blast.
I can't say much about the game, having not played it myself, but the animation is definitely pretty strange, as you can see. The best way I can describe it is squishy. There's also a particularly surreal moment where Turk laughs at you for an uninterrupted 16 seconds. Behold. It's like they asked his voice actor to do a few evil laughs, and then they just used every take back to back. And like most of the great Disney villains, Hook has played a prominent role in several Kingdom Hearts games, starting with the first one. In the premiere, Hook allies himself with Maleficent, and gets a new pirate crew made of evil creatures known as the Heartless. Only Smee remains by his side as a human shipmate. The game's heroes, Sora, Donald, and Goofy, battle Hook aboard his ship alongside Peter Pan. Hook uses Tinkerbell as a hostage and tries to have the heroes walk the plank into the jaws of the crocodile. The croc probably views them as appetizers before his eventual main captain course. Of course, the heroes defeat the Heartless, and Smee, like in many adaptations, ducks out when it appears he's going to lose. Captain Hook is the last one to be fought, and he proves to be a much more challenging opponent than he's been in other Disney media. Where was this fighting style in the movies? Still, he ends up being thrown overboard and chased off by the crocodile, as always. Hook becomes a victim of the Heartless in Kingdom Hearts 358 over 2 days. Oh, that title. He and Smee are seen treasure hunting, following a series of maps that mostly appear to be fake or decoys. Hook is convinced that one of them will lead to a truly priceless treasure. His greed begins to attract Heartless, symbolized by smoky shadows occasionally appearing around him. When they find the treasure, the greed makes it turn into a giant winged Heartless. The game's hero, Roxas, takes on the Heartless while Hook and Smee head for their ship. The Heartless ends up crashing down onto the ship, doing a hefty amount of damage to the poor Jolly Roger. As it turns out, the entire treasure hunt was concocted by Pete, working as Maleficent's main sidekick in an effort to manifest more Heartless for their army. In the prequel to the Kingdom Hearts series, Birth by Sleep, Captain Hook and Smee are repeatedly seen trying to steal a treasure chest from Peter Pan and the Lost Boys. When Hook finally manages to get a hold of it long enough to open the chest, he finds that whatever treasure it once held has been replaced with old wooden toys that belonged to Peter and the boys. Once again, adding insult to injury, Hook runs off when the croc rears its head. The Epic Mickey franchise gave us some alternate takes on old favorites, the pirates included. Mickey Mouse finds himself on a mission to save the Wasteland, a haven for forgotten Disney characters, including early drafts that didn't make it into the final cartoons. On his travels, Mickey visits Tortuga and encounters the X-crew of Captain Hook. In the Wasteland, Hook is actually an animatronic who spends his days gleefully fighting Pete Pan. Not Peter Pan, but a version of Peg-Leg Pete dressed as the hero. According to Smee, Hook has gone mad and is turning his human crewmates into robots. The unharmed pirates are hiding out in the jungle. Although these are supposed to be early, unused versions of the pirates, they more or less look the same as they do in the final movie. The colors of Smee's stripes and his hat are reversed, but he looks and sounds exactly the same otherwise. Considering some of the pirates who really were cut from Peter Pan, I suppose the designers made the right choice by sticking closer to the final film's designs. The pirates mostly resemble Mullins and Turk, and a few other generic models. One of the Mullins ones is named Starkey, which is the tiniest bit confusing to me, but it's nothing I'm going to lose sleep over. Meanwhile, one Turk-looking pirate is named Damien Salt, and has fallen in love with a cow named Henrietta, and needs Mickey's help in making the first move. Since Epic Mickey is a game of moral choices, the player can either help them get together, or if they're feeling cruel, keep them apart. Similarly, the players can either choose to defeat Hook in a manner that restores happiness to everyone, or to simply destroy the animatronic and to move on with their journey. In Epic Mickey, The Power of Illusion, Captain Hook is captured with many other Disney characters by the relatively obscure witch, Miserabelle. Mickey heroically sets out to rescue everyone, heroes and villains alike. He battles a hypnotized Hook, who he must defeat in order to save from the witch. On a less adventurous note, Captain Hook is one of the few meetable villains in the game Kinect Disneyland Adventures. He is a perfect gentleman to the guests, and unlike the Queen of Hearts, he will even allow them to hug him. Just not for terribly long. In a minigame themed to the Peter Pan's Flight attraction, Hook has captured one of the Lost Boys, Cubby. While the player distracts the pirates, Peter saves his friend. After that, Hook is fought in a sword fight, and goes through the usual motions of being bested by a child and chased off by a crocodile. I apologize for being so vague here, but I've described this exact same scenario a dozen times at this point. It's always fun when it happens, but I've run out of ways to describe it without sounding repetitive. On the brighter side, the Kinect game makes a good segue for discussing Captain Hook's presence at the Disney theme parks. He has been around since Disneyland's opening day in 1955. If you watch the opening day broadcast, you can even spot him alongside special guest Alan Young outside Peter Pan's flight. As many theme park fans know, the original Fantasyland dark rides were meant to be from the points of view of the main characters. The riders were not flying alongside Peter Pan, they were meant to be Peter Pan himself. Thus, Peter did not appear in the opening day version of his attraction. After flying out the nursery, over London, and around Neverland, guests would fly into Skull Rock. Captain Hook would stand on a cliff, his sword raised. He would shout down to Smee to fire at will, and his henchmen would struggle to aim his pistol at guests as they made a hasty exit. In the original ride, Captain Hook and Smee's voices were allegedly provided by Jimmy McDonald and Dallas McKennon, respectively. I can't find a source on this outside of some fan wikis, but the two voice actors were certainly active within the company at the time, so it wouldn't surprise me if this was true. If anyone can confirm this, please let me know. Here's a clip of their voices in that final scene for reference.
Mister Smee! Mister Smee! Here they come, Mister Smee! Fire, Mister Smee! Shoot 'em down! All right, coming!
In 1971, Walt Disney World opened with its own Peter Pan's flight. This one had Peter Pan make proper appearances, and also focused on the supporting characters more. The guest's initial view of Neverland now has Hook and Smee standing in the Jolly Roger below, firing a cannon at them. The Jimmy McDonald voice clip from Disneyland is used again here, and is in fact still used in the ride today. Instead of entering Skull Rock, the guests simply pass it and see the climactic battle on the Jolly Roger. The kids are tied to the mast, while Wendy walks the plank. Peter and Hook battle above in the ship's rigging. A simple turn round the bend reveals Peter victorious, and Hook struggling in the jaws of the croc. The dialogue at the end here of Hook calling for help and Smee responding also appear to be by McDonald and McKinnon. Disneyland would update their Peter Pan attraction in 1983 to be closer to the Disney World version, although they had Corey Burton record new dialogue as Hook and Smee to replace the older audio. The Peter Pan rides in Tokyo and Paris follow the American rides closely, but the newest version in Shanghai takes full advantage of the technological advancements. Captain Hook can first be seen as an animated shadow creeping up on Peter inside Skull Rock. Peter and Hook's battle at the finale is shown on an animated screen this time as well. Thankfully, the attraction's traditional animatronics outnumber its use of screens, and as a nice detail, the Captain Hook scene at the end struggling with the croc has tattered clothes. Another Peter Pan-themed feature that opened with Disneyland was the Chicken of the Sea restaurant, modeled after the Jolly Roger. Nearby was some scenery meant to look like Skull Rock. When Fantasyland was redesigned in 1983, the restaurant and Skull Rock display were removed. For anyone who still wants to visit the Jolly Roger, Disneyland Paris has an even more elaborate version. Rather than having the standard Tom Sawyer Island, Paris has the pirate-themed Adventure Isle. Here, guests can explore the Jolly Roger and actually enter the caves of Skull Rock. The interior of Skull Rock, also known as Ben Gunn's Cave, is meant to reference both Peter Pan and Treasure Island, full of skeletons and hidden treasure. A similar area is currently being planned for Tokyo Disney Sea called Fantasy Springs. In addition to sections themed to Tangled and Frozen, a Neverland section will also have a Jolly Roger and Skull Rock, along with a new attraction where guests will have to rescue John from the pirates. Costumed versions of Captain Hook, Smee, and even the crocodile have been appearing at the theme park since the 60s. Around the 2000s, the Hook and Smee costumes were updated to look closer to their animated counterparts. I think the new Smee outfit looks great, and while the redesigned Hook is objectively better and perhaps a little less frightening to kids, I have a nostalgic soft spot for the older, sterner-looking version. Hook has also appeared in person, so to speak, in a number of shows and parades over the years. For some of these, the costumes will have the actor's face showing with heavy prosthetics to exaggerate his features. In Disneyland's version of Fantasmic, he and his crew appear on the Jolly Roger. A larger-than-life version of the crocodile follows them. In recent years, they have been replaced by the Pirates of the Caribbean characters. In Walt Disney World, Captain Hook and Smee appeared in the Dream Along with Mickey show outside Cinderella's castle. Mickey plans to grant everyone's wishes for the show. Goofy dreams of adventure, leading into a dance number where Donald gets to dress as the captain. The real Hook doesn't appreciate the invitation, and is even more displeased when he realizes Peter Pan's there too. Maleficent makes her own grand entrance a few moments later. Hook and Smee are happy to help her spread her own twisted dreams, but run out when it appears that Mickey and friends will win. Maleficent is displeased with her cowardice, but ends up leaving herself, albeit in a slightly more dignified exit. The One Man's Dream stage show in Tokyo Disney had a Peter Pan segment that focused heavily on the pirates. In this musical review, Wendy is shown being captured. The pirates celebrate, but Peter Pan is quickly on the scene. His battle with Hook is cut short when the Croc lumbers on stage, frightening all the villains away. Earlier versions of the show had an amusingly floppy-looking Croc, while other ones gave him a better-looking inflatable costume. Several live shows in Disneyland Paris were based around Captain Hook. 2004's Peter Pan to the Rescue was staged on the Jolly Roger, where the pirates have captured Wendy, John, and Michael. As the title implies, Peter Pan comes to the rescue. 2 smaller-scale interactive shows followed in a similar fashion, Following the Leader with Peter Pan in 2011, and Captain Hook's Pirate Academy, staged first in 2013 and again in 2019. To round things off, a recent interactive show on the Disney Cruise Lines has Hook square off against Mickey Mouse and his own crew. And so, our look back at the long and ultimately kind of sad career of Captain Hook finally draws to a close. I know that Disney villains generally aren't known for their winning streaks, but poor Hook really never seems to catch a break. Almost every appearance he's made has had him losing a battle to a child, followed by him nearly getting eaten by the world's most persistent crocodile. Some versions of Hook are genuinely menacing, but for the most part, the Disney Hook never really had that. And that's okay, because although he's never been a real threat for long, Captain Hook is entertaining. At times, because of how one-sided his battles with Peter Pan are, Hook seems much more sympathetic than he should be. That's admittedly a flaw that the movie has. Peter's heartlessness has been toned down from the book, yes, but he's still an arrogant, cocky little brat. The book at least allowed us to get inside his head and see the heartbreaking side to eternal childhood, and how bittersweet Peter's life truly is. Disney ignores all that, and although the movie is certainly more upbeat as a result, it leaves us with an obnoxious protagonist and almost makes Captain Hook seem more likable as a result. Almost. Although Peter Pan is a flawed film, it's one of my favorite Disney movies made during Walt's lifetime, and I think a good deal of that is owed to Hook, Smee, and the Croc. And so, as we watch Hook get chased off by the crocodile for the umpteenth time, I think back to the opening narration of Disney's Peter Pan. All of this has happened before, and it will all happen again. In our next entry, we'll be looking at the villains from Lady and the Tramp, and I assure you, it will be a much shorter video. A few special thank yous and shoutouts. The Art of Disney Fairies, a spectacular Tumblr blog with a great selection of concept art. Daveland, a treasure trove of old Disneyland photos. Twitter user Benny Botros for reminding me of the Muppet Peter Pan comic. I actually bought this when it was first printed, and I somehow forgot about it while working on this video, so I'm thankful for the reminder. And finally, my dear sister, who helped me with certain pirate information, and was a delight to talk to while prepping for this video. Here's, hopefully, to some pirate-themed mini-golf next summer.
This long hair really doesn't work on you. Let's lose it. Oh, and these clothes too. Oh, babe, wise up. Get out of here, and so are you.